Hi, I'm Mike from 1A Auto. We've been selling auto parts for over 30 years.
In this video, we are replacing a front engine cover in a 2010 Volkswagen GTI. You may do this if your front engine cover is leaking or if it is rotted away. We are reusing our cover, but if you are replacing or reusing the cover, the process is the same. The manufacturer recommends when doing this job, you replace the front cover bolts, the engine crank seal, the engine crank bolt, the motor mount bolts, the front bracket bolt on the engine, and you will also need some RTV or engine sealant. This is the coolant reservoir we're going to be removing. We want to start by taking out this 10mm bolt for the washer fluid fill. 10 mil out. Now we're going to pull the washer fill out of the way. Next we're going to pull off the cap. Make sure this is cold, because otherwise you're going to have pressure and it's going to have a lot of coolant come out. We're going to pull this hose off. We're going to use some pliers, take off the clamp. We're going to use a right angle pick and get in underneath here to break the seals. Sometimes you can just twist the pipe back and forth, the hose. So if you go right around, that'll break the seal and pull right off. Next we're going to disconnect this connector. You're going to use a small flat blade screwdriver. You're going to pop it and pull it right out. We're going to pull this wiring harness out of your way. We're going to use a T25 and extension and a small ratchet. We're going to get these two fasteners back here. Make sure you want to have a drain bucket underneath because you're going to lose a little bit of coolant. Pull this out of the way. We are going to put a hose clamp on here so that we don't lose too much coolant. But there is going to be coolant in the reservoir you're going to lose. We're going to take this clamp off. We're going to use our pliers again. Push down the hose. Be able to grab the hose and pull. Twisting. There's our reservoir. We're going to pull the wheel off. These normally have caps over it, so on your vehicle you may have those. You're going to use a tool from the kit in the trunk. It's got like a hook on it. You put it in the center of the cap and you pull straight out. This vehicle does not have that, so we're just going to take them off. A 17mm socket and a breaker bar. Just going to break them free. This is the passenger side of the vehicle. We're using a 2-post lift to raise and lower the vehicle. At your house you can use a jack and jack stands. All right, we're going to take these lug studs out. Volkswagen uses lug studs or lug bolts, not lug nuts. For this one, when you get to the last one, you're going to want to make sure you put pressure on the wheel. Because of the lug studs, the wheel will fall. Grab the wheel. To access the front of the motor, we're going to take this panel out. We're going to start by taking these T25s out one at a time. So there's one fastener here, there's one here, one here, there's two right here, and underneath there's one right here, one here, one here, one here, there's two right here, and this one's missing one, but There's normally one right there. We're going to pull this lower shield off to give us more accessibility. We're going to take these other ones off from the other side, from the driver's side. I'm just going to pull straight back. Next, we're going to take this intercooler pipe out. This comes off the turbo and goes to the intercooler. We're going to take these two Torx out. It's a T30 and a Ratchet. These bolts are captured so they won't pull out, so they'll just stay there. We're going to pull this intercooler pipe out. There's a little lock ring here. We're going to pull it straight out, hold it. You should be able to wiggle it right out. And then we're going to do the same up here. There's another little lock right there. Pull it up. It comes out of the way. You can separate it there, but there's no need to, since we were able to separate it in these two spots. And that gives us the most room to work. Now we're going to pull the belt off. The tensioner is right here. You're going to use a 17mm socket, and we're going to use a breaker bar, but you could use a ratchet. Put it on, and you're going to pull it towards the back of the vehicle. That's going to loosen the tension for the belt. And you can slip the belts right off. You're going to want to hold a little bit so you don't get it stuck like that. There you go. This is a special Volkswagen tool that you're going to need to pull the crank pulley off. It's going to hold the crank. If you don't have this tool, it's going to be rather difficult to get that nut out. This bolt out. You might be able to use a impact to get this out, but we're going to use this tool to get it out. Put it in there. Then we're going to use a 24mm socket with a breaker bar. The tool is going to hold the crank pulley. Once it's pretty loose, it should come out fairly easily. There we go. And we're doing this now while the upper engine mount is still in, so that the engine is pretty stable so it won't shake around. So make it safer to do this right now. All right, immediately after taking the crank pulley off, something you don't want to forget that we actually forgot was you need to install the crank bolt with a spacer. Volkswagen actually has a special tool number. It is T10368 washer. We're just going to use a nut, and the crank bolt, you want to put it back in very carefully. The reason you want to do this is because all these gears are not attached to the crank right now, and they could fall off, and then your engine would be out of time. So just put it on loosely and you're good, just finger tight. So we need to gain access to the front of this engine. We're going to have to take this out. This is what is known as the noise pipe. So we're going to start by taking this clip out up here. Just use a screwdriver, just like down below. It pulls out right there. I'm going to take this Torx out. It is a T30 and a ratchet. There's a hose right here. I'm going to pop the hose out, the retainer. I'm just going to set this on the side. Before we pull this front engine mount out, we're going to have to support the engine from the top. So we're going to pull the oil cap off. And we're going to grab underneath this shield, this cover, pull straight up. We're going to use some holders to hold the engine up here with this bracket and this bracket right here. I'm going to put the oil cap back on so we don't get any debris or bolts or anything to go down there. This is how we supported the engine on the top. Next, we're going to have to pull this front motor mount out. We're going to start taking this bracket off. We're going to use a 13mm socket and a ratchet. Next, we're going to pull this bolt out with the same 13mm. And we can pull that bracket right out. Next, we're going to pull this pipe out of the way. There's a little release tab right here. This comes right out. So we're going to pull this bracket out of the way. We're going to use a 10mm socket, an extension, a ratchet. So we're going to take this 10mm nut out and also the 10mm bolts right there. We're going to take these two top motor mount bolts out. We're going to pull this coolant hose out of our way. I'm going to use an 18mm socket on an extension with a ratchet. Just break that one free, then we'll go to the next one. Break the next one free. And while you're doing this, the motor may drop down a little bit, but that's why we have our support. That's one bolt. That's the second bolt. And we're going to take this bolt out. We're going to use a 16mm socket and an extension and a ratchet. And we're going to take this back one off too, 16mm. And we should be able to pull this motor mount out. Get it out of your way. There's three triple square fasteners that hold this engine bracket to the engine. We're going to start with this one. We're going to use a triple square, it's a M12, which is 12mm on a ratchet. Loosen it up. Once it breaks free, we'll do it by hand because there's not a lot of space in there. It's real tight in here, so we actually had to modify one of our bits because we couldn't get it in there with the driver to be able to get the bolt out. So we just trimmed ours down a little bit and we're able to get it in there with a wrench and able to break it free. And that pulls out I'm gonna leave that one in for a second. I'm gonna try to grab the last one. And now that's in there, so I'll use the open end of the 13mm wrench and break this one free. And it's loose. So that's out. Now I'm going to pull this one out a little bit. So bracketry will come down. Now we're going to take the dipstick tube out. There's a fastener right here. There's a T30. Break it free. And there's a T30 right here also. I'm going to take it out. Pull the dipstick tube out. Dipstick indicator out. Now we're going to pull the dipstick tube straight up. Wiggle it back and forth. There it goes. Pulls right out. All right, we're going to move this tensioner out of our way. Use a 17mm wrench and a small Allen. Pull the tensioner, and then there's a little hole right here that's going to keep the tensioner pulled. I'm going to leave that there. All right, now we're going to loosen the bolt for this pulley. So we're going to have to take that off. We're going to take these Torx. They are a T30. There's 15 of them that go all around the front engine cover. The reason we had to pull that pulley off was to get to that access to that one right there. We'll start down here. All right, we're gonna pull this bracket off next, so it will be out of our way. I'm pulling the cover off. It's a T30 again. I'm gonna use a flat blade screwdriver and just go around the edge, try to pry a little bit, trying to get the sealant to break free. Try to be careful when prying on this. It will bend the metal. It's just thin steel, and if you do bend it too much, you're gonna have to replace it. Do your best, but it may need to be replaced. I'm just gonna try to move this tensioner back so it's out of my way. All right, to get the cover off, we're gonna have to gain more access. We're gonna have to pull this turbo elbow off. I'm gonna use a 5mm Allen's. There's 3 of the 5mm Allen bolts. So I'm taking off this 4mm Allen on the boost control solenoid right here on the back, because the solenoid is in the way of the last bolt for the right angle coming off the turbo. With that removed, we can push it out of the way so that we can access the last 5mm Allen bolt. That last bolt, pulled it out, and we're able to pull this out. And there is a O-ring right here. You want to make sure that stays there. You don't want to lose that. Pull the last cover bolt out. Slip the cover right out. All right, now we're gonna clean up all this gasket area. We're gonna use some brake clean and a rag. Clean it off. Make sure you clean it real well so the new engine sealant will stick. In some of the areas that just the brake clean and the rag wouldn't work, a razor blade would work. Just lightly scrape it. We were able to reuse our cover because when taking it off, it was not mangled beyond reusing it. So, but if yours does become warped severely, then you're gonna wanna replace it. Now we're gonna take off the sealer. Just gonna use a razor blade, peel it off. You can use a scraper. It's a little bit tedious, but go all the way around. Scrape it all the way off. We're gonna use a little bit of brake cleaner on this and a rag, and wipe it. So there's a little area right here that's lifted up from when we were prying. I'm just gonna use a little hammer and bang it down a little bit. And it's flat. All right, before we put some new engine sealant on this, what we're gonna do is we're gonna replace the crank seal. We're gonna bang out the old one. You're gonna have it face down. We're gonna put it on a piece of wood to raise it up a little bit. And we're gonna take a little, either a screwdriver or this is a little pry bar and a hammer. Just gonna tap it down. There we go. See, so it's pulled out. Sometimes you can just pry it like this. Peel it out. Just check in here, make sure everything looks okay. Looks like there's a little bit of silicone on there. Now we got this area cleaned up. We're gonna take our new seal, line it up. We're gonna take a block of wood, put it on there flat. We're gonna use a hammer, just hammer it down. So you wanna make sure that you do not crush these oil valleys when you're hammering down on that seal. The seal needs to go down a little bit more. This block of wood only got us to there, to flush. What you can do is if you have a socket that will fit this perimeter of the seal, that would work. We're gonna use a seal installer. Just tap it down some more. And that's good. So I'm gonna use a little more brake cleaner on this surface, just to clean it up one more time before I put my sealer on. And we'll use a little more brake cleaner over on this surface before I start my sealer. We're gonna use some of our engine sealant. Put a nice little bead all the way around. This is a little too thick, but it's okay. Go around all the bolt holes. A little bit of oil right here that normally drips while you're sitting there, so just wipe that real quick before you put the cover on. And we're gonna put the cover on. Just ease it in there. Try not getting your fingers too much in the RTV, the engine sealer. And it's lined up. Now we're going to push it down. Now we're going to take our new T30 bolts. I'm going to put them in the cover. Before we torque them down, you're gonna put them all in. So to get these two bolts to line up, we gotta torque these two bottom ones down a little bit because they're on a different surface, so a different plane. Snug them down a little bit. So to get the bolt from underneath here, we're gonna move our tensioner and put that Allen back in so it holds it. May take a little bit of maneuvering. Now I'm gonna start snugging down these bolts, but I'm not torquing them yet. I'm gonna just get the whole cover even. So you're gonna wanna torque these in sequence. And the torque spec is 8 Newton meters or 5.9 foot-pounds. That's for the first torque sequence. The torque angle on the second sequence is 45 degrees. It's gonna be hard to get a torque angle meter in here, so do the best you can. 45 degrees is half of a 90. I'm gonna make sure this O-ring didn't fall out when you're putting it back together. If the O-ring looks like it's been damaged, you're gonna want to replace it. Ours looks pretty good, so we're gonna reuse it. I'm gonna put the elbow back in. On these bolts, I'm gonna just put a little bit of thread sealant and reinstall the bolts. So I'm gonna snug these bolts up. The 5mm Allen. It's hard to get a torque wrench up here, but the torque spec on these bolts is 9 Newton meters or 80 inch-pounds. I'm gonna reach around on the back side of that turbo outlet and put these little 4mm Allen bolts into the turbo boost control valve. It's easier to get to one of the bolts while I still have the engine bracket out. Now you can tighten up the bolts from up top. It's going to be easier on this turbo boost control solenoid. I need to move this wiring harness back there. Now I'm going to install this engine bracket. Remember, we're putting our new bolts in here. So. I'm tightening these bolts. It's really hard to get in here, so we used our tool that we made. You're gonna want to torque these to 40 Newton meters and then another additional 180 degrees, the best you can. There's our tool that we cut. We're going to drop the vehicle down to put the front motor mount on because when we install the crank pulley, we want the engine supported better so that it doesn't move around a lot, so it'll be safer. So we're going to drop that down now. We're going to put our motor mount in place. We have the new bolts we're going to install. We have, these two are different. This one goes in the back of the mount on the body side. This one goes in the front on the body side. That stud holds a bracket. Snug all these bolts down. You want to make sure you get them all in first, and then we're going to torque them. We're going to torque these engine mount bolts. These are going to go on the engine side. The torque is 60 Newton meters and then an additional 90 degrees. I'm going to go another 90 degrees, which is a quarter turn. That's about good. Now I'm going to torque the engine mount to the body bolts. These are 40 Newton meters, and then an additional 90 degrees. And 90 degrees is about a quarter turn. Now you can remove however you supported your engine. We're going to install our dipstick tube. This may have been a little bit easier if you'd done it before you put the engine bracket on, but it's not impossible to do it now. I'm going to line it in the hole and push it down. We got our dipstick down. As you can see, it goes down to where that lip goes right to the hole. This is going to be difficult whether you reuse the cover or replace the cover. Use a little bit of force and you should be able to get it down. Now we're going to put our crank pulley on. Take this off very carefully. Take the bolt out, and if you had the special tool or whatever you can use in place of it, use the nut. The crank pulley has a key, as you can see right here. We're gonna have to line it up top. Slide up good. We're gonna put our brand new crank bolt in. Now we're going to torque our crank bolt. We're going to torque it to 150 Newton meters or 111 foot-pounds, and then additional 90 degrees. One way to get 90 degrees, we're going to mark the nut, the bolt, I'm sorry, and then we're going to mark 90 degrees. It's a right angle, so it's fairly easy to get. So now we're just going to get the bolt to there. On our serpentine belt tensioner, we had put a bolt and a nut just so that we could move it around and stuff with ease. So we're going to take that off so that we can put the pulley back on. Install the pulley, the washer, and the bolt. I'm going to snug that up pretty tight. All right, so we're going to install our serpentine belt. We're going to have to go over the alternator pulley up top. We're going to come down around our AC compressor. We're going to go around our crank pulley next and pull it down around our tensioner. And now that it is set, we're able to pull our holder out. We're going to take tension off with our 17mm socket and ratchet. And then we can pull out our Allen, and now it's good. We're going to put this little bracket on with the T30. Snug it up. Now we're going to reinstall our intercooler pipe. Make sure these clips are pushed down. On this one, you can see it's out. All I can do is push it in. Push it in. Just give it a little force till it clicks. install these two T30s. We're going to use our T30 socket and a ratchet. Snug these down. Next we're going to install this cover. This way. There's all these grooves you need to line up underneath here. It pops into place. And then you have these little Torx that go in. We're going to install this side panel shield. Install all your T25 bolts. Now we're going to install the tire. Line up with the holes and hold it. And we'll use our 17mm socket to put our lug studs on. Or lug bolts, whatever you want to call it. Now we're going to torque the lug studs to 120 Newton meters in a star pattern. When you do it in a star pattern, it makes the wheel go flush to the brake rotor properly. We install the two T30 bolts for the dipstick tube. Reinstall the dipstick. We're going to install this bracket. It goes right here, right over that stud. Back. Now we're going to have to put this nut on that stud down there. It's kind of hard to reach. We're going to use a 10mm socket and an extension, but to prevent the nut from falling out, I'm going to take a little bit of grease. A little bit of grease on the nut, like so. Put the nut in the socket. And then the nut will not fall out. I can slide it down there. And then torque it down, just snug. So we're going to put this other 10mm down here. We can do the same grease trick if need be. This bracket goes right on top with the bolt. I'm going to install this bracket. Goes right here. 2 bolts. Our 13mm socket, and a ratchet and extension. Tighten these down. Next we're going to install this noise pipe. Line it up. Press it in till it clicks. Put this hose on. This bracket broke off, so we're just gonna slide it in here, clip that in, that hose. We're gonna install the engine cover. We're gonna hook up the lower pipe for the reservoir. Push it on. Once it's on, we can pull off this clamp and get it out of our way. We're going to move this hose clamp with a pair of pliers. Just get it lined up and squeeze. Get it on there. It's best to try to get in the same grooves that it was in before, or close. Install this hose. With pliers, move this hose clamp. Before we install these wires around here, we're gonna install our T25s. Snug it down. Remember, it's plastic, so you don't want to go too tight. We're gonna install this wiring harness into these clips. We can plug in our connector. Until it clicks. We can reinstall the washer fill to the bracket. And use a 10mm socket and ratchet. And we're going to top off our coolant. You want to make sure you use Volkswagen approved coolant. When doing this, you're going to want to make sure you run your engine for a while before you drive and recheck the level to make sure it's okay. In theory, there should not be any air in the motor, but just in case the vehicle burps and you need to add coolant, you should do so. We'll install our cap. So it clicks.
Thanks for watching. Visit us at oneauto.com for quality auto parts, fast and free shipping, and the best customer service in the industry.